What scenarios first come to mind when you hear the phrase workplace violence? Do you believe you've witnessed or been a victim of workplace violence? Could these situations have been prevented? Were they resolved satisfactorily or appropriately? Under OSHA's standard on agency responsibilities, agency heads are required to provide each employee employment in a place of employment which are free from recognized hazards that are causing or likely to cause death or serious physical harm. As you'll learn in this training, workplace violence is a very real occupational hazard that moves beyond physical harm and is rarely mitigated through the use of PPE. Akin to workplace harassment, workplace violence affects everyone, although some employees may be disproportionately affected. OSHA defines workplace violence as any act or threat of physical violence, harassment, intimidation, or other threatening disruptive behavior that occurs at work site. The U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics reports that over 14% of fatal occupational injuries were due to intentional injuries by person, primarily in private industry. Around 2% of non-fatal private sector industries involving days away from work were a result of intentional injury. Examples include shooting, hitting, rape, stabbing, cutting, slashing, piercing, kicking, beating, shoving, strangulation, robberies, and verbal assault. These focused statistics provide a glimpse into the realities of workplace violence. Everyone is at risk for workplace violence. Two high-profile industries where workplace violence is prevalent include healthcare and social services, but other occupations particularly at risk include commuter services, evening shopping, gasoline and convenience store workers, educators, and law enforcement personnel. Workplace violence can originate either outside of the organization or from within, and may involve coworkers, supervisors, support staff, intruders, or domestic partners. According to the National Safety Council, these fall under four main categories: criminal intent, customer-client, worker-on-worker, and personal relationship. Given the variety of forms workplace violence can take, from bullying to physical assault to homicide, the most easily identified are those that result in injuries or death. The National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health reports that females are disproportionately higher risk of experiencing trauma as a result of workplace violence, whereas males are significantly more at risk of workplace violence-related deaths. Remember, everyone's at risk, and workplace violence can happen anywhere. As essential as it is to identify risk factors of workplace violence, it is important to avoid misidentification of warning signs. That said, behaviors that go unchecked and emotional needs that go unsupported could develop into expressions of violence and aggression. Typical warning signs include acting out through yelling, slamming doors, and throwing objects, not accepting responsibility, deceptive or addictive avoidance strategies, selfishness, or behaving in a way that shows lack of care for others, and lack of flexibility, social graces, or the ability to see other points of view. Again, these personality traits and behaviors are simply useful predictors for workplace violence. The goal of being aware of these risk factors and warning signs is to intervene with positive behavior support early on to help employees and clientele avoid allowing their emotions and tendencies to manifest in aggressive and threatening acts. These deeply traumatic events are just as diverse in negative effects as they have on victims and the work environment. The Department of Labor outlines several of these, ranging from the obvious loss of life, increased security costs and property damage, to the more obscure hits to morale, psychological damage to loved ones, and negative publicity. Although everyone is responsible for preventing and identifying workplace violence, there are specific measures that can be put in place to help avoid incidents and build a culture of nonviolence and non-aggression. Engineering control measures are those that are integrated into the built environment. Depending on the facilities and use of space, these controls might include security systems, exit routes, metal detectors, areas designed to allow for threat de-escalation, and even proper lighting. Administrative control measures go a long way in communicating workplace expectations and policies. Examples include having a clearly stated threat and violence zero tolerance policy, tracking employees, clients, and service contractors, especially any with a history of violence, and avoiding isolation and vulnerability in low security areas. Approaches and engineering and administrative control measures are as diverse as the spaces for which they are designed and the work culture they serve. Perhaps as important as an engineering and administrative control measures is the need to build in culture controls, those that encourage mutual beneficence, communication, and respect. This is beyond the scope of this training, but an aspect of preventing and responding to workplace violence that likely bears consideration at any place of work. In general, all employees are responsible for their own behavior, knowing and adhering to policies and safety measures, and reporting incidents of violence and cooperating with investigations. Supervisors and managers must ensure that policies are communicated clearly, reports are taken seriously and fully investigated and documented, take measures to identify warning signs of potential threats and ways to mitigate threatening situations, provide employees with training in de-escalation techniques, stress management, conflict resolution, and other areas. Other key personnel include safety managers, site supervisors or foremen, human resource officers, facility management, and public affairs. It is up to management to ensure everyone is aware of their responsibilities. If you are unaware of your responsibilities or your company's policies, procedures, or workplace violence prevention measures, reach out to your supervisor or human resource officer for details. They should also be able to help you identify specific risk factors, warning signs, and hazards that are specific to your work environment. You may be able to advocate for adoption of a site-specific workplace violence inventory list or smart device application that allows for anonymous reporting. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention provides several resources aimed at workplace violence awareness and prevention. This training was aimed at making you aware of various forms of workplace violence, the effects it has on victims and company, and the control methods. You should also be aware that you play a role in violence prevention. Your education does not stop here. Be sure to communicate with your supervisor to better understand your role and next steps.